Welcome. This will be a quick tutorial on using the Savage Soul character generator, also known as the Soulgen, specifically for the 2026 edition of the Savage Soul. So to get things started, you'll first want to go to savagesoul.com and click on the Generators and More tab. You'll then see a link for the most current version of the Savage Soul character generator. Click on that and the generator will appear. But when it appears, this is not a generator that you will actually be able to use. In order to make the generator usable, you first need to make a copy, and this will copy it to your own Google Drive. You'll want to change the name when doing this to the name of the character that you're creating, and then you will be ready to go. So in this case, we'll create Joe Wizard. And now Joe Wizard has been saved to my Google Drive, and this character generator is now fully functional. Can go ahead and close the actual Soulgen, because all we're going to need now is our copy of the Soulgen that is saved as Joe Wizard. This first box is just the character's name, which is free text. In this case, we'll say Joe Wizard, which will be our test character name. Sex is a drop-down. Male and female would be the standard. If you choose neuter, you will want to choose a corresponding peculiarity, that such as standard of beauty, that will fit the neuter selection. Otherwise, choosing male and female will determine how certain peculiarities will work in the game. Age is simply free text. You can choose whatever age you want, consistent with your character. This really doesn't matter. It won't affect attributes or peculiarities. If you choose disadvantage such as immature, you'll want to choose a age that's appropriate to the level of immature that was chosen, but for the most part, just choose any age that suits your character. Size and mass are very important in the Savage Soul in that they affect certain attributes such as body, strength, passive defense, and score such as dodge. And these numbers are adjustable, but it's actually better to wait until the end to adjust your character's actual height and weight, and you'll see why as we progress. Character type is either PC or NPC. This is important because certain peculiarities in the game are limited either to PCs or NPCs. So in this case, we're designing our player character, so we'll choose PC, and then in the experience box, write down however many experience points your game master told you could use to design the character, and you'll notice that next to it, it will show how many experience points are unused at that point in the character creation process. So we'll stick with 600 for now. Hair, eyes, and color are just a way to flesh out the character. This is again a free text box, so we might make Joe Wizard have brown hair, blue eyes, and tanned skin. PTs are personality traits. These are personality adjectives that a character can choose to describe his character and the way that he envisions playing the character. No, a character should never be forced to play in accordance with his personality traits, but if he does, that could be worth some additional experience points for outstanding role playing. Again, personality traits are really just meant to flesh out the character and never force the player to play in any particular way. You will now see the next box is attributes. A character is primarily defined by his attributes and his peculiarities. And peculiarities, as you'll see here, are broken down into disadvantages and advantages. We're going to start off with the attributes. Now, attributes show 3 columns. The most important of these columns is the total, which is the character's actual score for that particular attribute. Most attributes will start off at 5, especially for a character that is size and mass 5, which is the size and mass of essentially an average human. Level will show the number of points, essentially, that the character has purchased to increase his total. And then the third column will show the experience point cost of that increase. So, for example, if we were to buy 2 levels of body, the character's body score would increase from 5 to 7, and that would cost a total of 300 XP. So you would see up here the character would then have only 300 unused experience points remaining. But in this case, we're going to have Joe Wizard is going to buy 1 level of body, so he's just a little bit more fit, a little bit stronger than the average mass 5 human. And of course, we're going to make Joe Wizard a wizard, so his primary casting score is going to be sorcery, which you can see you can't actually increase sorcery itself. Sorcery is based on intellect. So Joe Sorcerer is going to buy 3 levels of intellect, increasing his intellect score from 5 to 8. This leaves Joe Wizard 200 unused experience points, which he can then apply to, say, 2 levels of defense, increasing his defense to a 7. That leaves 50, and he will buy 1 point of willpower. Willpower is useful in many ways in the Savage Soul, but for a caster in particular, willpower is one of the attributes that determines a character's mana pool. If you'll see here, Joe Wizard's mana pool is 14, which is his willpower plus his intellect. At the bottom of the character sheet, you will see there are certain scores, including various combat scores, run meters, swim meters, etc. All of these are based on either peculiarities or attributes, and they cannot be independently increased. But for example, if Joe Wizard were to have bought 2 levels of athletics instead of 2 levels of defense, you would see that his run meters would increase from 10 to 14. His swim meters would increase from 2 to 3.5, etc. But in this case, we'll go back and have Joe Wizard increase his defense from 5 to 7, which you will notice changed his dodge from 5 to 7. And also changed his melee block score for unarmed blocks. So now that Joe Wizard has completed all of his attributes, it's time to move on to peculiarities. Now, you'll see that peculiarities are broken into disadvantages and advantages, and that disadvantages are limited to 5. Over the many years of playtesting, we discovered that any more than 5 disadvantages was very difficult for the game master to keep track of. And more than that, limiting a character to 5 disadvantages forces the player to really think about what disadvantages make the most sense for his particular character, rather than just taking a string of disadvantages just to earn additional combat levels and non-combat levels. With that said, you'll see that at the top of the peculiarities section, there's a box called unused Cs and a box called unused NCs. Cs are combat peculiarity levels, NCs are non-combat peculiarity levels. A character starts off with a certain number of combat peculiarity levels according to his starting experience. But by taking peculiarity disadvantages, the character will earn additional combat peculiarity levels and or non-combat peculiarity levels. A character can select his peculiarities in one of 2 ways. Either by clicking on the drop-down, which will then show a complete list of all the available peculiarities, either disadvantages or advantages, depending on what you're selecting. The other option is simply to start typing the name of the peculiarity that you're looking for. So one very common peculiarity is no mutations. This means that the character cannot take any peculiarity that is considered a mutation, some of which are very advantageous, such as regeneration or enhanced hearing, night vision, etc. And since the character won't be able to take any of those mutation peculiarities, he earns 2 combat peculiarity levels for taking that particular disadvantage. Another possibility might be to take fear. And here we can see all the various fears that a character can take. For Joe Wizard, maybe we'll take fear of undead. Maybe Joe Wizard had a bad experience with some zombies or some skeletons at some point, and he now has a unnatural fear of undead creatures. As you can see, taking fear of undead earned him another 2 combat peculiarities and 1 non-combat peculiarity. Now, in addition to earning peculiarity levels by taking disadvantages, it's also possible to buy peculiarity levels using experience. And that's what this box is for. A character can purchase additional combat peculiarity levels for 100 experience points each. So if we hadn't bought Joe Wizard's defense at level 2, then he might have 100 unused experience points, and he could use those to buy our 1 additional combat peculiarity level without having to take any corresponding disadvantages. The minus C's box allows the character to trade combat peculiarity levels for non-combat peculiarity levels at a rate of 2 non-combat peculiarity levels for every 1 combat peculiarity level. So let's say Joe Wizard wanted to trade away 2 of his combat peculiarity levels. He could then increase his unused non-combat peculiarity levels from 1 to 5. Once you've selected all the character's peculiarity disadvantages and decided how many total peculiarity levels the character has to spend, it's time to move on to advantages. In this case, Joe Wizard's primary ability is going to be sorcery. So again, we could drop down and look for sorcery, or what's probably easier is just to type in sorcery. And there you can see casting sorcery. That is going to be Joe Wizard's primary peculiarity. And the number in parentheses after a particular peculiarity is the maximum level at which that peculiarity can be purchased. So we'll say Joe Wizard is going to start off by buying casting sorcery at level 3. And when he does so, you'll see it immediately reduced his unused C's and unused NC's to account for the cost of sorcery at level 3, which is 1 C and 2 NCs. This means that Joe has the ability to cast spells, but at this point he doesn't actually know any spells. So Joe Wizard is going to actually have to learn spells by buying them as additional peculiarity advantages. So in this case, we're going to look at the various sorcery spell groups, and Joe Wizard is going to take harm, and he'll take heal, and he will take defense. This would make Joe Wizard a pretty well-rounded caster in that he could use the harm spell group to dish out damage to opponents. He can use the heal spell group to heal himself and others, and he can use the defense spell group to protect himself and others. And as you can see, each one of these spell groups has a corresponding cost, which was then subtracted from unused C's and NCs. So at this point, Joe Wizard still has 1 unused NC, which he might decide to spend on physical beauty at level 1. Doing so changes Joe Wizard's physical beauty from average, it's an average looking human character to good looking, a little bit better than average looking. To the same extent, Joe Wizard might have taken a physical beauty disadvantage, such as unattractive. At level 1 would change his physical beauty to unattractive, and at level 2 would change his physical beauty to ugly. But in this case, we're going to have Joe Wizard take physical beauty at level 1, so he is a good-looking sorcerer. This still leaves him with 4 unused combat peculiarity levels, so we'll just go fast here. Perhaps Joe Wizard wants to take unarmed fighter at level 2, which makes him better at striking and kicking and dodging. And then maybe he'll also take acrobat at level 2, which will improve his balance and will also allow him to perform acrobatic attacks. Now, if we didn't want Joe Wizard to be size and mass 5, which is essentially like an average human size and mass, what we would do is take a peculiarity called Stature. And Stature could either be Stature small, or Stature large, or in some cases, Stature gigantic. So if we wanted Joe Wizard to be on sort of the smaller range of humans, we might take Stature small at level 1. And you'll see that automatically adjusted Joe Wizard's size and mass from 5 to 4, and also changed his height in meters and his weight in kilograms to something that falls within the permissible range for size and mass 4. We could also go the opposite direction and give Joe Wizard Stature large at level 1, which would then increase his size and mass to 6. Only once we finally decided on Joe Wizard's size and mass, only then should you actually adjust the character's height and weight. And what you will see is that it will only allow you to adjust the character's height and weight to within the limits of the particular defined size and mass. So, for example, if I wanted the character to be 50 kilograms, that is too light for a mass 5 character. I would actually have to then make the character size 4 by buying 1 level of Stature small, and I could have the character be 50 kilograms. If I wanted the character to be 20 kilograms, that's obviously too light now even for size 4, so I'd have to buy an additional level of Stature small, and the character would be mass 3. You'll notice that as soon as I did that, it changed the character's type from PC normal to PC mutant, because being so small as an adult human would be considered a mutation. But in this case, we're going to keep Joe Wizard at size 5 and just choose a mass that is consistent with something within the range of size 5. So in this case, he'll be 80 kilograms, which is approximately 176 pounds, and he's 1.8 meters tall, or approximately 5 feet 10 inches. And then we'll put back in the 2 levels of acrobatics that we bought. And at this point, Joe Wizard is complete. As you can see, he has 0 unused Cs, 0 unused NCs, and 0 unused experience points. The next thing to do is to buy Joe Wizard his starting equipment. As you can see, all characters start with 1,000 credits and a suit of tattered clothing, which they get for free. The character can then begin buying things such as melee weapons. Perhaps here Joe Wizard would buy a combat knife at high quality, which would cost 600 of his 1,000 starting credits. And then he might also want to buy a magical component. And in fact, he'll buy 4 magical components, and that will mean that the value of the equipment that he has purchased equals his starting credits. Now, it's entirely possible for a character to have more than 1,000 credits worth of equipment to start out. To do that, he would have to trade experience points for additional credits. And this is done at a rate of 100 credits per 1 experience point. So, for example, if the character wanted to trade away 50 experience points, he would have 6,000 starting credits, but he would immediately have to reduce his actual experience to 550. But in this case, we're just going to stick with the 1,000 default credits worth of equipment. You'll also notice that each item has a WH question mark column. This is used to indicate where the item is being held. So, for example, these magical components are currently shown as ready, whereas his clothing is shown as worn. If, say, he didn't want to be wearing his clothing at this particular point, he could say it was ready, or he could say it was off, or he could say it was in his backpack if he had a backpack, although he doesn't actually have a backpack. But in this case, obviously, it would be worn, and the same would be true of weapons. His knife is currently held, but if he wanted to, his knife could be ready, simply loaded on his load system, or it could be off. Maybe he just left it at home today, but ordinarily it's best to treat it as held because then the weight will be calculated properly. You'll notice that all of the weight of the equipment that he purchased is shown here. He's currently carrying 2.29 of 15 kilograms before he becomes encumbered, and so he is currently unencumbered, which means he's not suffering any attribute disadvantages as a result of his encumbrance level. As a final step in fleshing out the character, the player may need to specify some less specific peculiarities that the character has taken. For example, if the character took linguist at level 1, the rules would specify that he was entitled to speak 1 additional language in addition to his native language. So we might want to say speaks English and Spanish. To the same extent, if he took a fear that was not so clearly defined as fear of undead, and perhaps took fear of aggressive animals common, then we might want to specify that he has a fear of dogs. But in this case, none of those things apply to Joe Wizard, so he wouldn't actually need to put anything in that box. One final thing a player can do to flesh out his character is to add a picture to the character sheet by first highlighting the place where you would like the picture to appear, then going to Insert, Image, Image Overcells, and then choose any location on your computer. Choose a picture, and then you can adjust the size of the picture to fit the place where you would like it to be on your character sheet. So at this point, Joe Wizard's sheet would be completely done and he would be ready to play. I hope this tutorial was helpful, and I hope you enjoy your time playing the Savage Soul. Thank you very much.